Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. I did a long voiceover yesterday, which you'll hear in a moment. I think it's, excellent in a lot of ways. Um, you know, I mean, as much as I shouldn't say excellent, good for me, right? I mean, you should never say excellent or great. You should say it's good for me. It's one of my better things. And I've been, going on a thread of things I've done lately. But I got a kind of epic comment here, and um, the person wrote this, and I looked into it because RFK Jr.'s third wife Cheryl Hines speaks to him like a child, as you can hear from her on the beach scene, and is very encourages to how he presented himself as a COVID warrior, a COVID. I meant to boop that, but a COVID warrior in all these interviews. He was banging Cheryl while he's still married to his second wife. This is from a video where I showed he was on the beach and he was doing the rings, and she was filming him, and she talks in such an annoying, high pitched voice. He was banging Cheryl while still married to his second wife, with whom he had 4 children. He was effing around on his second wife to the point that in 2001 alone he had 37 affairs. The New York Post got hold of his diary documenting this and reported on it. This is reckless behavior and suggests he's easily compromised. He drove his second wife to the point of insanity and then gaslit her when the cops came to their home one night due to a fight. This is him being a people pleaser, like I said in my video, that he is somebody that, he needs to be liked. He needs to be redeemed by other people. But I covered this in that video. I'm putting this in the front of this video. I've already completed this video you're watching now. And I was reading through the comments. I was just about to edit it and render it. I had another video that was monetized today that is on my other channel that was I was one video behind, right? I posted a Hollywood celebrities dropping like flies while this video had already been up for a while, waiting to be reviewed, and they reviewed it and monetized it. So I have a lot of content out today. And so I wanted to make shorter videos, but this one's going to be long and that one's long. And that's just the way it's going to be. But it says, came when her cops came to their home one night due to a fight. He gave up his family for a Hollywood Hines world. His second wife hung herself on the home property a few days after he filed for divorce from her. He clearly wants the woke Hollywood world and had one foot there. Remember when Cheryl pitched a hissy fit against him early on in the COVID days? He has been on record as saying climate change deniers should be arrested and that the federal government is the biggest polluter, that he wants to be the president of the government. This guy is a faco and dangerous one at that. I am HO. I don't see him ever holding public office. And so this is a pretty damaging accusations, which there is some truth to. And some of this stuff is just factual. Some of it is, they could be misinterpreting it or claiming things that aren't true in the media and the New York Post. But I'm going to let me go over to my other app and show you that this can be some of what this person's commenting about can be corroborated. Okay, so this is Mary Richardson Kennedy, and here is the. On May 16, 2012, Richardson was found dead at her home in Bedford, New York. Her death was ruled a suicide by hanging. An autopsy revealed that she had antidepressants in her blood. Her funeral, organized by the Kennedy family, she was held at St. Patrick Cathedral Church in Bedford. Richardson married Robert Kennedy Jr., RFK Jr., on April 15, 1994, aboard a research vessel on the Hudson River. They had 4 children. Connor, Richardson, Kennedy's are the children's names. On May 12, 2010, Kennedy filed for divorce from Richardson. 3 days later, she was arrested and charged with driving under the influence. She reported struggling with alcohol and substance abuse. A court ordered the temporary custody of the children be granted to her estranged husband. And then a couple years later, she committed suicide. And so, again, with all the tragedies in the Kennedy family, I mean, could they just be, as much as he wants to glorify his family when he gives interviews, what a freaking mess, right? RFK Jr. wife hangs herself. This is the story from the New York Post, who battled her husband's rumored philandering by turning to alcohol and prescription drugs, hanging herself in a barn on Westchester Estate yesterday, sources told the Post. Now, the Post doesn't like Kennedy, and so you have to take that in consideration, because the Post, as much as I like the Post, they do hit jobs, and they're owned by Rupert Murdoch that owns Fox. They do hit jobs on people. They're very right-wing. They're very pro-Israel. They have a lot of things where, they are, they're quick to do a hit job on somebody, right? So you have to take that in consideration, but you really can't, this is a mess. The 52-year-old mother of four, the latest victim of a family dynasty cursed with tragedies, may have taken her own life because she was haunted by the broken marriage her friends lamented. She was deeply troubled, abusing alcohol and prescription drugs. She had cause. She was used up and tossed away by Bobby. That was awful. There they are together with the kids, some of them. Mary said she was facing financial ruin with her American Express coming after her for an outstanding debt along with several other creditors. In addition, she was concerned that Robert was about to substantially reduce the amount of financial support he gave her, and was terrified she would have to file for bankruptcy and lose her home. The Kennedy family dealt stoically with the latest in a long of shocking deaths. We deeply regret the death of beloved sister Mary, who was radiant and creative spirit, will be sorely missed. So there's the part with Cheryl Hines, and this is an article way back from when this happened in 2012. And so there was rumors he was dating her while they were married. Kennedy, 58, filed for divorce on May 12, 2010, days after Mary called the police to complain about her husband, but she appeared visibly intoxicated when the officers arrived, according to police. As of yesterday, the divorce was not finalized, TMZ reported, but Kennedy has since been dating actress Cheryl Hines. A day after filing for divorce, Bedford police were again called to the home because of a report of domestic incident. And so I'm sure it goes on from there. But I'm not going to read it all. So this is 2013. RFK's sex diary, his secret journal of affairs. RFK Jr.'s journal is full of mistress and Catholic guilt. The Post exclusively revealed RFK's secret slams against Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, and Governor Cuomo, and insight into his days full of celebrities, yachts, and falcons. RFK Jr. grappled with what he called his biggest defect, my lust demon, while keeping a scorecard of more than a dozen conquests, according to his secret diary. The thick-rated journal was found in their home by his wife, Mary Richardson Kennedy, distraught over their impending divorce and Kennedy's serial philandering, committed suicide last year. A copy of the 398 pages reviewed by the Post details RFK Jr.'s daily activities, speeches, political activism, and lives of his 6 children, but they also record the names of women with numbers from 1 to 10, next to each entry. he rated them. he rated them. The codes correspond to the sexual acts with the meaning 10 meaning intercourse. I thought he was rating them on a scale 1 to 10. But that's equally twisted. There are 37 women named in the ledger, 16 of whom got 10s. On November 13th, 2001, RFK records a triple play. The separate encounters code 3, 10, 3, and 2 occur. The same day attended a black tie fundraiser at the Waldorf Astoria for Christopher Reeve's charity. That's weird. I mentioned Christopher Reeve in a voiceover, and here it is right here. This is a real time. I just talked about Christopher Reeve, which you heard, or you will hear in one of my voiceovers that I've already done for this video. Sat next to the paralyzed Superman, magician David Blaine, and comic Richard Belzer. It was a hectic month for Kennedy, who traveled to Toronto, Louisiana, and Washington, D.C., and listed at least one woman's name on 22 different dates, including 13 consecutive. Most of the women are identified only by their first name in the ledger. So this guy, and I want to get into this because, let's just finish this. I'm going to wrap this up with a voiceover. RFK Jr. allegedly had 37 affairs with women in 2001. And so this was, he started being with her in 2010 or whatever. APA source, RFK's wife hanged herself. This was stuff I had up before. Here. Friends think Hines was crazy to marry cheater RFK Jr. Cheryl Hines confronted husband RFK Jr. over a secret tirade with stunning brunette mom of 4. So he even cheated on Cheryl Hines. And the wedding is still on. RFK Jr. will marry Cheryl Hines despite affair allegations with surgeon's wife. And the time RFK Jr.'s wife, Cheryl Hines, called his rally remarks reprehensible. So there's all that. Let's move over to the voiceover portion. So there's a lot here I want to dissect. But the thing for me is Kennedy went on a number of interviews saying that he had an extraordinary will force, that he gave up sweets and he didn't eat like anything he wanted to. He could just use his will force to give up. And I had that when I was a little kid. I noticed, I ate candy. My parents would give me a quarter, 25 cents, and quata. It's like the one thing I have to concentrate on pronouncing. Quata back, like people would comment. I have one like Boston accent word. I grew up in Connecticut, and it's quata. Everything else I say without that, I don't know why that, but I quarter. And my parents would give me a quarter, and I could go get a comic book or go get a candy, and I bought a lot of candy. I bought like 4 things of candy when I was a kid, right? 25 cents was a lot of money. And, around Halloween and things, and, when I ate desserts, I realized it made me feel bad, as a little kid. And I stopped eating candy because, I might eat it occasionally, but, I saw that it, it did make me feel good. And then my mom, because of allergies, told me I had to give up dairy. And, I liked dairy as a kid. And, as a kid, you're not even conscious of what you're eating. Like you just go eat something, and you're like, does it have dairy in it? But I just gave it up for like 3 months. And so, I just had that ability, right? And so when he talked about having this ability, it was something that, I myself had. That, I used drugs, I used alcohol, and it wasn't hard for me to give things up and change my diet. I've done it a number of times. I've changed recently, and I can, give up TV or whatever. I got rid of TVs, and I could easily give up the internet, all these things that are, addictive. They don't have any hold on me. And so when he said he had a will force where he could give anything up, but it was, drugs that he couldn't, I understood what he was talking about, at least in terms of the first part. And from the second part, I put it down to some scars, which I talk about quite a bit on my spiritual videos, because some scars are impressions, and it's what you take with you. The impressions, could be addictions, it could be guilt, it could be shame, it could be, things that really resonate deep within your internal system, and they form impressions in your heart, and which are called samskaras in the Sanskrit word. And when you come back in your next life, you have to work those things out. Anything that formed a deep impression, trauma, anything that you take with you on an etheric level. And people who have addictions usually have some scars of addiction in a previous life. And so he has addictive tendencies. And he had trouble giving up drugs. He got busted for drugs, number of scandals. And, I used drugs when I was younger, and, most of us have. And he's open and honest about it, which I found refreshing. But now we know that he's lying about that. He's lying about his will force because he also has just said, which you heard the quote, wherever he said, when I was, reading the New York Post article or whatever article it was, that he had this weakness, which was a sexual addiction. This is clearly a person with a sexual addiction that comes from some, there's a wound in him. There's some kind of need in him. And I was talking about this in an earlier video. He needs to please people. He needs to be liked. He needs to be, get something from the crowd, which is, not a good characteristic or quality as a potential leader. He has charisma. He's got a good mind. He has good qualities as a potential candidate and he could be a quality politician, but he has a desperate need. I talked about Isaac Cappy, some of these other people. There's people who just need to be loved by, lots of people. They need adoration. I talked about Madonna and Will Smith and, these fame whores and people who, they just need to be fed. And he, loves to please a crowd. Unfortunately, he contradicts himself and changes his positions to fulfill this need, right? He needs to be liked and he needs to be seen as, something. I mean, the way he defended himself against charges of anti-Semitism, he had 37 affairs on his wife in, 1 year, right? One effing year. So that's, a horrible person. And, as someone who's desperate and needy and just, sexual addiction and, can't control themselves. So again, maybe he comes to some, like he said, he had a spiritual awakening. I don't know when that was, but since he's had that spiritual awakening, he's still had issues with, his addiction to drugs turned into addiction to, women in a way that's unhealthy. And these were the women that probably went, first of all, he was a Kennedy, and second of all, he'd go to these conferences and these women would come up and ask him to look into the boop for, their kids were all autistic. He said these women would come to his speeches and, ask him to look into this thing because he was already dealing with the mercury stuff in water, right? And so these women were probably looking at him as like some sort of prince, some sort of part of the Kennedy royal family and a champion for things that meant something to them. And he used that as a way to, get self-gratification out of. I was talking with my wife about my brother who was he had a sexual addiction and was a cheater. And, he left his wife, who later died of cancer, for another woman who was a nightmare, crazy woman. And my wife and I were walking around the pasture. I was talking about this. And the one story, that my brother and I have had sort of a falling out, or we don't talk to each other anymore. This happened before. It's hard for people in my family to get along because we're not all that we're not all that likable, right? In terms of, we have difficult personalities. But anyways, we had a falling out. He's the only person in my family who does Saj Marg. He does Heartfulness now and all of that. But when I told him about Saj Marg years ago, this meditative practice that I do, I went out to Great Barrington. I was living in Northampton, Massachusetts, which is, there's a 5-college area there, very liberal area. And I was working in a treatment center, and this is when I was beginning my, I just finally graduated from my, after my third attempt at college, I finally graduated and all these things. And, I eventually would get my master's degree. And I had just started Saj Marg a month earlier, the meditation that I do. And my brother, wanted me to come out. He was at Great Barrington, Massachusetts, which was like 2.5 hours away from where I was. I'm not sure. I just looked it up. It's like an hour and 20 minutes. It's a little bit farther to my brother's place, but it was between 1.5 hours drive. And I was very excited to drive and tell him about this new spiritual practice I was doing. My brother was worried I joined a cult, so he was just sort of checking up on me. My brother's 17 years older than me, so he's like sort of in a way, a father figure, but like a not a good one. And he had a lot of issues. He had agoraphobia. He fought in the Vietnam War. He couldn't leave his house, or like a 3-mile radius around his house for years. He had issues, and he was a serial cheater. Like he was, I didn't find out this later. I mean, the evidence was there. I just didn't pay attention to it. And I had a number of people who were cheaters, friends who were cheaters. And, everyone comes to their own idea about these types of things, if you really think about them. And so when I thought about cheating, I thought, the person that you marry is the person that you love the most, or you should love the most, right? Your spouse is, you have an intimacy with your spouse. This is long before I was, close to being able to be married. But I just thought about these things. Like I think about everything, I talk about here. And, my understanding of it, this is what I came up with, right, as a young person, that if you would cheat on your spouse or someone that you love, someone that is your, the person that you're most loyal to, your partner. And again, there are circumstances within that, right, where, your marriage is already over and, there's different conditions. But I mean, when you're in a relationship where you are intent in keeping that relationship, right? This is the kind of cheating I'm talking about, where you're dating somebody or you're in love with somebody and you're married or something, and you have no intention of breaking off the relationship. You want to maintain that relationship as a good relationship. You don't want a divorce from that person. That person isn't neglecting you in any way. The person's a good spouse. And you just decide to have an affair as an extra thing that you think you can get away with and continue on your relationship. Or, you expect the other person just to accept that you have this, this need or this desire, not a need, a desire to be in extramarital relationships, and you expect the other person to eat it for whatever reason, right? And if you're willing to do that to that person, then who won't you betray, right? Like, if that's the person you claim to love the most and you've made some commitment to in one way or another, when you could just as easily say, look, this relationship is over. I want to go be with somebody else. That's all you have to do. Just to be honest about it. You don't have to, hide and be deceitful and gaslight and put the person through all kinds of hell just because you want something more than, or whatever it is, whatever your flaw in your character is. And so I realized that when I was younger. I was like, it's a bad thing. And I had friends who were cheaters. And, I don't like to lie. Like even when I wasn't a good person. I was using drugs and, just very selfish, very punky. I just never liked to lie. It's not something I was good at. And I had friends who were cheaters, like I said, who were great at lying. And I had one friend who, he loved cheating so much. He described this to me, and I was like, wow, you're really screwed up. He was dating this woman. She was like, this is we're in our 20s. We're in college years, early 20s. And he was dating this girl she worked as a dog groomer. So she probably had her own business, but she was young. And she was teaching other dog groomers. And one of the girls she was teaching, my friend took a fancy to when he went over and hit on her, even though his girlfriend was right over there, because he did stuff like that. And he liked the risk of it. And the girl walks away from him and goes right to his girlfriend and says, he just hit on me. And he's telling me this story. And he goes, he was caught. He goes, but the wheels start turning. And he saw an instance earlier where his girlfriend had chastised this girl and kind of maybe embarrassed her. And he said, look, she was just trying to get back at you. like, and he was like totally psyched that he got away with it. He was like, man, the wheels started turning and I was able to, talk my way out of it. And I'm like, dude, you got real problems. Like, you got real problems, bro. That, he was getting off on it, like being able to lie and manipulate people and these things. And I've known lots of people like that. There are a lot of women like that who get off in lying and manipulating people and things like this, which to me is like hell, right? Because you're just waiting to get caught and being, it's just you're living a life where, you're going to get exposed at some point or another. And so my cheating friends' girlfriends all realized at some point that I had problems lying. Like some of them were my roommates, some of them wherever. And so instead of confronting when they suspected their boyfriends or whatever of cheating, they would ask me and like put me in the middle, and like it just sucked. And I'm like, why am I stressing out? Like I'm more stressed out than like I'm, like, and I would say, don't put me in this position. Later I learned. But if it was going to do it over, I would just tell the truth and say, yeah, he's cheating on you. Like, now I would, just because, why put me in that position, right? So I go and visit my brother, and, my I was either 29, just had turned 29. So my brother was 17 years older, so he was 46. So, very old, and he had just been divorced, and he left his wife and his mother of his 3 kids on my nephew's, his son's, his birthday. So that caused huge problems. His son's probably still bitter about it. Like his son never really got over that, right? And he left it for this blonde girl who was just absolutely crazy. Like all these stories, these things, like she was just nuts. And she called herself an artist, but like the paintings, she did paintings that were like, almost like finger paintings, and they were weird. And she did a painting of him and her, and he moved into the apartment below me. I was, dating this nurse, and and we had kind of like a lot of laughs at the craziness. This was a apartment owned by some Italian guy in the south end of Hartford, Connecticut, kind of where we grew up, and my brother grew up in Newington. I grew up in West Hartford, and these other suburbs of Hartford. It's a small kind of weird town. It's the insurance capital of the world. Like all these big insurance businesses are there, or were back when I was a kid. I don't know where they are now because of globalization. And so my brother moved downstairs, and I come downstairs, and he's like, wow, she's really crazy. And he shows me the picture that they hung up on the wall that she had painted him and her, which was some abstract picture. It wasn't like 2 people. It was just, he goes, yeah, this was supposed to be a representation of our love. And she had taken a knife and she had cut like slits into like, and I said, you dude, you're going to wake up with your boop in a jar, right? Like she was crazy, and she was kind of nuts. And so I go visit him in Great Barrington, and there's a lot of famous writers that were there, famous like old school, like I don't know if it was Thoreau, but Herman Melville wrote Moby Dick, and there's actually some sort of a white rock that looks like a whale that people say, some people say that Herman Melville, like it's like on the side of a mountain. There's this white chalky rock, and it kind of looks like a whale. And Herman Melville was a heroin addict himself. They said he saw the whale and he came up with the idea for Moby Dick. I'm not sure if that's actually true. There's some debate about that. But anyways, I go see him. And he's with his youngest son, who's, probably of all my nephews and nieces, the one that I, connected with. He was kind of a quiet kid and, thoughtful and just, better than the rest of my family. Like just somebody who was, more reserved and introverted. And we were fishing. And so here's Peter and Paul fishing. I'm telling them about Saj Marg, the meditation, and it's sunset, and there's a balance in the universe. Like we meditate preferably before dawn, but the idea is that when the sunset and sunrise are spiritual, you can feel them. There's a condition there because there's a balance between light and darkness. Like there's this is like a switching point, and there's just something there. And the sun setting, we're like on this little dinghy boat catching fish, fishermen, like, in the biblical context. And I tell him about Saj Marg, which eventually would change his life because he ended up becoming the caretaker of the ashram and all these things, right? And so I tell him about this. And I'm not sure if it was on this visit I stayed over his house. I'm not sure what happened. But at some point, his son isn't there, so it might be the second visit. And he tells me there's a young woman next door, and she comes over and knocks on the door and asks him for a ride somewhere, right? And she's like 22, 23, and she's kind of, skanky and just, not someone I was much younger than my brother, and would not be interested in this girl romantically, right? But he's dating this crazy woman, and this girl is living with her boyfriend. And he starts telling me how he's going to, be with her, right? And he's cheating again. And, I already know this is like going to end disastrously. And the girl isn't somebody like, it's just a bad decision on his part. And he wants to drive her out to this area, and, he thinks he's going to get with her. But at some point, his crazy girlfriend smells something going on. She just psychically intuits that something going on. And it was a time when my nephew had told us about the saying cock block. And my brother, we're just learning what that meant. It was like a new term, like to us, back, this is 1993. And so my brother said, she's cock blocking me, his girlfriend, right? And so then we go out to eat at a diner, me and him, and his girlfriend comes in a separate car. And there's a moment of silence, right? Where no one's talking, and my brother just goes, cock block. He just says it. His girlfriend goes, what? And like she knew she could smell a rat. And he's like, oh no, my son, he just said this thing. And he just, and I'm like, trying not to laugh because I'm laughing because, I can only control myself so much because it's just that funny. And we get back in the car and he's like, holy boop. I can't believe. He goes, I'm lying again. It's like I want to get caught. Like he's just, it's just like, a sex addict who's just entering into these self-destructive behaviors, right? And I'm laughing hysterically because of the whole thing. And so we go back to his like apartment. He had an apartment on a lake, but it wasn't a nice one, kind of rundown place. And the girl is now going to wherever she's going with her boyfriend. So my brother loses interest in it. And he kind of knows he's, about to get caught by his girlfriend. So he says, Paulie, can you drive her? And I'm like, well, I don't really want to, and he just, I had to clean up his mess, right? He's my older brother. And I'm like, Jesus, you're still doing this? You're pushing 50, like, and I end up having to go out of my way. Now it's like a 3-hour trip, it's just I got this girl who, she seemed very weird, and her doofy boyfriend in my car, just all this stuff. And, he ended up breaking up with this woman. This is stuff I'm telling my wife last night, so it relates here to Kennedy. And, my brother wrote a book about the gift that every year on his birthday he would go out and get laid. Like he just, a serial cheater, right? This is back when he was married. And, there's all these other things that came up later. And his wife was rightfully kind of bummed by all this stuff because he was agoraphobic. Like he had this issue of leaving his house, right? He couldn't leave his house. And after he was married, he left his house all the time. And he said when he got married, that was what caused his agoraphobia. And, his wife didn't like that, hearing that, that all that stuff, because, he's blaming her and all that. But he ended up dating this woman from work. He was working as a counselor at the VA. He was counseling other Vietnam vets. And there's a woman, her husband was an alcoholic, and their marriage was kind of over, and he got into a relationship with her, and she really, loved him and wanted to marry him, and he just wasn't into her, and I kind of could tell. It was a weird relationship. And at some point, he was at the in the ashram, and um, there was he was a caretaker of the ashram, and there was a controversy because he was living with this woman, and they were having sexual relations or whatever. This is, I would say, maybe another 10 years, something like that. Maybe not that long, probably. I don't know. 4 or 5 years after this original story. I told you, and I don't feel resentment, but I'm not psyched that, he always thanks me and is happy that I told him about Sajmark. It's changed his life. And like I told him that, and I got stuck driving his skank to, cleaning up his mess, right? And which I wasn't all that, I'm not bitter about it, but it's not cool. And so, somebody complained, one of these sort of do-gooders, a woman who was, who was hoeing it up herself in the '60s, and then she became very rigid and very moralistic and religious. And she complained to Master Charji that my brother was, was with this woman as caretaker, and they weren't married. And Charji was, basically implying that they should get married, and my brother didn't want it. And this woman came up to me, and she's like freaked out, like again, and I'm trying to tell her like, you should bail. Like my brother's a disaster, and I just like it's not going to end well. And I, could sense he really wasn't into her, right? And then a number of years later, it's like 2012, there's a gathering in India. And this woman shows up, and she's just pissed at my brother. She's just angry at him. And, in a very, like, she's been carrying this on for, like, I mean, I'd seen this woman in years. I don't know how long I hadn't seen my brother either. But it's been a year. So it was 2000 and, 1996 or 7 or 8 when that stuff went down with, him not marrying her, when they kind of broke up, right? And Charji ended up saying, you go back to your husband and you go back to your wife. That's what Charji said to them. And they went back, and neither one of the people wanted them back, right? It was like a whole thing. But Peter said it had positive repercussions because, like both of them doing that, because the kids were all mad at them. There's a whole thing. But anyways, it's just a mess. And so 2012, so this is about 14 years later after all that stuff went down, at least 12 years later. But it was earlier 2000, like just based on the time period of what's going on with my life. I know it was before 2000. It was before the Idaho stuff. It was before my family and I moved to Idaho. I had 2 kids at the time. And, years later, like 10, 12 years later, I have a stomach issue, which you often get when you're in India. And it was about when I was about to get a sitting from Kamlesh, who is, now the defunct master of heartfulness. I mean, there's so kind of many, like strings to this thing, right? The corrupt, president of the system. And I'm going to the bathroom like 2 o'clock in the morning, and the bathrooms are not great at the ashram, they're whatever. So I'm walking to the bathroom. I'm sleeping underneath the meditation hall. It's hot, I'm in a tent. And this woman, my brother's ex-girlfriend, confronts me or says, and she starts talking about my brother, and she says that at one point he borrowed her car in Connecticut and picked up this woman, this blonde-haired woman who he left his wife for, and brought her down to the ashram in this woman's car. And like, she's just pissed about all this stuff, right? And, my brother had told me that he brought this woman to the ashram, but he left out the part that he, borrowed this, his, other girlfriend's car to do it. And she had taken her original 3 sittings meditations, but she kept her eyes open during the second one and skipped the third one. So she never officially started, and my brother was now a preceptor. He gave her the 3rd sitting, and I'm like, well, that's not how it works. There's like, 15 years later, it was like you have to start over. Like, even if you quit and come back, you have to get those first 3 sittings again. Like, you have to restart or whatever. But, I'm telling my wife all this, like, in just, the mess that he made, being a sex addict and, a womanizer. My brother has charisma. He's a great storyteller. He has his personality that draws people to him, and he has a lot of great qualities. He's a hard worker. I mean, I guess in some ways he reminds me of Kennedy in a different way. Of course, Kennedy's a lot more polished. But there's a desperation there. There's a need for approval. There's a need to be liked or loved, and getting it from an external source, which the Sajmark system, it's finding and connecting to God inside of you, and then you have connection to the loves inside of you. And there's a lot of desperation and bankrupt people out there that extract prana, spiritual energy from, their egos extracted from social, getting thumbs up on social media and all these things. And I talked about how I went through this myself, where, the woman I was married to was psychological issues and was suicidal and, self-abusive and just twisted and manipulative and, just with hell going through that, right? And, there's some evidence that maybe Kennedy's wife was like that, but who knows if she was like that because of she was just like that, or, and I get into this at the end of the video talking about victim consciousness. But, clearly he wasn't a great husband. He was a cheater and he had, lots of issues. And so, people who get their needs met through the internet or whatever it is, through popularity. So when I became successful as a YouTuber, that was good for me in some ways because I've always been an underachiever, and, things were so frustrating during my, my marriage, and things just wouldn't go in a positive direction, and we suffered so much failure. I suffered so much personal failure of things I was trying to accomplish but never did. And so, it was good for me to have some success here on YouTube and have people be interested in what I think and whatever. But that was short-lived. Like at some point it just didn't matter, right? What mattered to me was that I was putting out quality content. There were a time where I was going to shut off the comments altogether because I thought they were a hassle. And I get a lot of positive comments and people saying that what I do here changed their life. And I guess I feel something about that, but, and it's some motivation to keep on going. But it's not why I do it. It's not, I don't even look at the likes and dislikes. And, when I post something on social media, I don't look at how many people give it a thumbs up or, it just doesn't matter to me. It's not like where I need to be fed. Like I don't need to be fed by this job or other people or, of course there is some, I get, love from my wife, and that's, there's positivity there, which is great. It's a personal thing, and, I'm very grateful for it, but also I get it from meditating and having it from inside, like just connecting to God, because there is an infinite amount of God's love that's available to everybody. But there are people who need it from external sources. They need to be validated by other people. And, this is so available now. And Kennedy is one of these people. There's a desperation there. And, regardless of this story, and I mean, he, to me, is still kind of a real truther in what he says. And I think there's sincerity there and, all these things. But somebody who's done all this stuff is easily compromised. And they haven't even brought up this stuff yet. Like, this is personal stuff, right? And Trump is a womanizer and, serial cheater, and Jojo Magoo is, whatever he is, a groper and a snoozler, all these things, right? And Kennedy having these issues in the past, and, he hasn't addressed them, with the present. And, like, he's a little bit more transparent about his drug use and things that he said than other people. Like, he, doesn't excuse his past failures, but he's negated this one, which is a big one, and it's out there. The New York Post posted on this years ago, and, maybe it's a hit piece, and there isn't, it isn't all true, or they're making it sound worse than it is, but it's really bad. Like 37 women in 1 year is that's an addiction, and that's a, sign of character flaws and being broken in various ways. And the way that plays out now is he's going on all these interviews with different types of people, some truthers, some, whatever, and getting adoration from these people obviously means something, right? But the bottom line is you can't trust him. Like, if he's doing this to his wife and these other women and even his current wife, this is his third wife, and you can't trust them. Like, you can't trust somebody like this. They're very self-centered, and their addictions will always trump their ability to be loyal and trustworthy and whatever. And there's just there's nothing here, regardless of how much of a shill he is, or how much he's connected, or how much he's playing a part here, which I don't think he is. He's broken in a way that just can't be. It just can't be trusted. Okay, so everything you're going to hear from now on, from this point on of the video, was stuff I did before. Like, I completed this, like I said, then I got this comment, and I thought, I might as well include this because it's kind of epic. And so here's the rest of the video. There's one more thing I left out here before I get to this voiceover I made the other day, yesterday, which is excellent for me. The thing with Kennedy is, early on, when I saw some of the choices he was making, and they weren't choices that I would disagree with his point of view, like they were truther choices. But, going through what I know we all go through as truthers, and the way that the media and everybody else is handling truthers, he was saying things that I knew would cause him unnecessary issues ahead, make him unelectable. It's almost like he has this self-sabotaging, self-destructive tendencies, which, of course, we now know he does. But I was questioning why he was saying the things he was saying. And that thing he said about the Chinese and the Ashkenazi Jews getting COVID less, we're dying less from COVID. And there was, he was saying there's evidence that they're making biological weapons that are targeted at people genetically. Like, I knew when I heard that there was going to be pushback. I mean, just, everybody here probably understands why. And there was, and then his reaction to it made things worse when he did that interview with that rabbi and his take on Palestine. But there was a self-destructive nature in all those decisions. And the way he went all in on Palestine, it basically killed him in the truth community. I mean, demonizing Palestine. But it all started with that off-the-cuff remark to the audience he was talking to. It would please them, but it was going to hurt him on the overall scope politically. And we now know from his decisions there is a self-hatred, a desperation there, a wound where he is making bad choices. And for him to keep a diary of his affairs and then leave it with his wife, who was, an alcoholic drug abuser, who was, who knows if, she was a nightmare in her own way, but we don't know. But certainly his behavior would make that worse. And to let her have that diary when they're going through a divorce, being a public figure, and have that diary come out where he's rating these women, he has a rating system. He's admitting to all these things, and it was published and scandalous 2012, is an act of self-sabotage, and, there's just something there, right? And, wanting to get caught, all these things. Like, I was making reference to my brother saying that when he said cock block, he was like wanting to get caught, right? Like, just, what are you doing? And that's how, when people are lying and cheating and doing criminal behavior, some part of them wants to get caught, like their soul, whatever, wants them to stop doing things that are as bad for their soul's progress. My dad had his own little thing. My dad, I don't think he ever cheated on my mom, but like he wanted to. And, my mom called me up, and my dad and my mom separated for a while when he was in his 70s. Like, he was really old, and they lived till their 90s, but he was, really old. And so my parents lived in a cul-de-sac in Boca Raton, Florida. And I was there for a little bit after my first failure at college, and then I moved up and lived with my brother and his family for a while until I got my own apartment. Then I was on my own ever since, right? So that was like when I was 19, 20, 21, whatever. Those years. And my early 20s. And there was a woman who I don't know if she had just gotten divorced but she was an attractive woman who moved like maybe next door or the two houses away from my dad. I just telling my wife about this. I thought it was important to include. And, so I knew who she was. Like I had maybe met her and, I had some memory of who my mom was talking about. Well, she ended up working my dad for some money. She flirted with him and, my dad was so old and I mean, there's no way this woman would have had, you could tell she was kind of like a player, like she had, just from my experience of her, someone who's, probably uses her looks and flirtatious stuff to get stuff out of men, right? And my dad gave her $500. And my mom was really hurt because my dad was cheap and he never bought her jewelry or, and I don't know how much my mom was even into jewelry, but, he didn't buy her things and do nice things for her. And she stuck with his, narcissistic, just unbearable. He was unbearable in different ways. And my dad was not somebody who was, he died with not very many people liking him. And, my mom just stuck with him, and I mean, that's to her credit, right? And she stuck with him all those years and he was never grateful. And he just shelled out $500 to this woman. So I called my brother up and I told him the story. And my dad's name was Ralph, right? Ralph Romano. And so my brother said, I told him the story and he goes, typical Ralph. He didn't get laid. He got caught and he paid money. Which is, from my brother's perspective, was kind of hilarious, right? But there was just a self-destructive nature there. And, my mom was thinking about like divorcing and there was, my dad would never have survived on his own. He was old and needy and, I mean, just, immature and just like he would have died. I mean, they were separated. They lived in two houses. I know that because my dad called me anytime he talked to me. He goes, "We got to get rid of these two houses." And, and I said to him, what have you changed that you could win back, your wife, my mom? And he said lots of things, right? But they ended up getting back together and my mom suffered, a number of more years with my dad as he fell apart physically. And then she died a year after and, just miserable. But, in terms of this self-destructive nature, people have it. And, Kennedy getting caught and all this stuff coming out publicly. I'm just finding out about this, but this has been out there for a while. New York Post stuff. This has been, there since 2012 and before. And then he had he got arrested. His dad got him a job in a DA's office as a lawyer, and he got arrested for possession of heroin. So he's had a number of skeletons and things in his closet, which wouldn't bother me if he was, changed in some way. And people do change and they do evolve. They do mature. And his drug use doesn't bother me because, my drug use doesn't bother me either, right? Like that's something in the past. And, I was never addicted, but it was something, I regret doing, just at least in terms of the physical repercussions, some of which I'm probably suffering now. And I, didn't do what he did, right? But in terms of like making mistakes, people make mistakes. And, if you learn from your mistakes and you grow as a person, and he seems to be somebody who, takes some accountability based in what he talks about. And, now I'm thinking it's performative. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's legitimate. I don't know. Where he's, talking about himself and things that he's learned and how he's evolved, and he was open about it. And no other politician I've seen ever done this. So it was something refreshing to see. The problem is the way that he handled the Israel-Palestine thing was an indication of, and some of the other things he's done since then, and some of the things like little tells he has when he talks, you can see that he still isn't, he's not trustworthy for one because, he's a people pleaser and he's not filled that void that's inside of him. But the other piece is that, he's not over it, right? Because that's an indication. The way he handled that whole thing is an indication of self-sabotage and bad decision-making and not being trustworthy. That's the main thing. You can't trust this guy. And if you look at what he says, the stuff that doesn't contradict itself, but the things that he said in terms of truth are things, he's by far the best candidate. And the way he's conducted himself on the campaign, he's by far the first candidate. But he would only be a good candidate if he delivered on his promises. And you think he would be more likely to do it because he's somebody who can convince you he believes in what he's saying. And, maybe he does believe in what he's saying for now, when he's talking to you. But he also believes what he's saying when he's talking to somebody else, right? That's how it, would be the same thing when he's cheating on all these, wives and women and, multiple mistresses and these things he's doing. When he's talking to that person, he's believable until he's talking to somebody else, one of his other flings or whatever it is. And then all the other things that he's involved in. I mean, he's got a little Hunter Biden in him, right? I mean, he's got his own little Hunter Biden that lives inside of him because he's doing Hunter Biden-like things here. Any chance of my support is gone, but I would like to see what he would do, if he gets elected. It's just, you can't trust that he's going to follow through on any of the things he says or believes because, again, he's demonstrated these character flaws. He has had benefit for us all in terms of the show, in terms of bringing the censorship up to, whatever it is that he's done with the censorship things. But, he's like deeply flawed like the rest of these people. And, think about all these presidential candidates in their personal life, and it's always a mess. Donald Trump, 3 marriages, cheated on all 3 of his wives. Joe Biden, his wife died, his son died, his other son's a crackhead. His daughter says these things about him, showering with her. I mean, things like this. And then all the snoozling, sniffling, groping, and all the plagiarism and all the... I mean, these are the best of the best. These are what America's kicking out as the person that's supposed to lead our country. The 3 top candidates right now are Kennedy, Biden, and Trump. And they're all like deeply flawed people in their personal life and, and in their professional life as well. Trump, 2 bankruptcies, like they're just failures and, a mess of a person, narcissists and philanderers and all these things. And, that's what you got to choose from. But anyways, let's get to the original video I made before I read the comment that led to this Kennedy thing. Just one more thing about the Kennedy thing, because I'm going to move on from this, hopefully. All of it. The stuff to do with Israel, Palestine, the Kennedy stuff. I just want to, get all of the stuff that I, want to get out here done and in this video. And, I'm going to say some maybe more positive things coming up. I did a voiceover called Kaboom. That's where the title of this video is going to be. You can't trust RFK Jr. and Kaboom. The video was originally going to be called Kaboom. And so I was just going to do the part that you're going to see. That was going to be a video in itself. But I'll just put this all together. It'll be a long video. And then I'm done with it. But I went and had lunch with my wife. And, I was editing. And I had these thoughts. And I thought this is important. When Kennedy went on any interview that I saw, pretty much every person, again, some of them I didn't see the whole interview, they were just, praising him to no end. I mean, with that rabbi, he was praising Kennedy like he was the greatest person in the world, right? And then all these other people, Joe Rogan, and interview after interview, they were praising him before the interview and throughout the interview process. He was able to win over all these people, and many of them are truther type people that are very cynical and all the rest of it, right? And so, that speaks to something Kennedy was able to do. There were 2 things here. One, he was able to be, transparent and sincere and, wherever that means for him, because obviously you can't be cheating on your wife with 37 different, women in 1 year and then just all the rest of it over, span of a lifetime. And not to be a deceiver, right? But what Kennedy's able to do is he's able to understand the person he's talking to and give them what they want. And I said this before, I've seen various videos where he's contradicting himself. And so he plays to the audience and he gives them what they want. And he makes them feel, good about it, right? Feel good about him. He sells himself as being, a likable, intelligent and trustworthy person. Like he sells himself, and that's a good quality for a politician, and it's a good strategy for people in the future. But you can't be using something as a strategy and be sincere. And I think he's sincere when he's doing it, but therein lies the problem. Because when you're talking in front of an audience, a group of people, and your desire is to be liked and to be celebrated, and you're trying to impress people, and you're like as a lawyer, he's trying to win. He's trying to use all these things and using his family and talking about his dad and his uncle and these things and the Kennedy lore and all the rest of it, and making it sound a lot better than it is because the tragedies and the deaths and the all of it, right? The scandals and there was, if you're not aware, his uncle Teddy, he drove his secretary who was having an affair with. He was supposed to be going home, but he was going the wrong way on a bridge, and the car ended up in Chappaquiddick River or Lake or whatever it is, river in Massachusetts, and like he didn't call the cops till like hours afterwards, and she drowned, and it was a huge scandal and very questionable. He was a womanizer. His dad, I don't know about his dad, but his uncle was supposed to be a womanizer. And then his uncle had these intimate relationships, JFK, with a guy who was openly gay, and they were wearing matching outfits. He had a really good friend who was gay, who they both wore matching outfits. So there's a lot of stuff there, right, with their whole family, and a lot of, he tried to dispel his grandfather being a bootlegger, and he said a lot of it was a CIA hit piece, and it was believable when he said that, but now it's less believable. And when you talk to a group of people, you talk to in front of a specific demographic, you're going to cater to that demographic. One of the blessings I have here, and what I'm able to do here, is my two dogs are here, and the window's open, it's raining outside, but I'm just in a meditative state because I'm all alone. And, there's an idea of an audience, and once in a while I say something, and I'm like, oh, this demographic is going to be unhappy with that, or, and I'm aware of it, and I don't, but it's just, I'm able to get into a flow and let the energy and the ideas, a lot of which just come to me when I'm talking. And when I'm doing I have two different processes when I make a video. I do a voiceover, and you can see a difference in the voiceover in terms of a flow as opposed to when I'm using the ScreenFlow app, which I have to do a lot of editing out of. And I have, my consciousness is pulled away to the article I'm reading or the, whatever I'm talking about. If I'm responding to a video, and, I can be funnier and I can be reacting spontaneously and come up with jokes and mock people when I'm watching an interview or something. And I do have there is a flow to that as well. But I get in a much better flow when I just have the microphone and I'm not even, looking at the computer, and I'm not even thinking about anything. I'm not aware of my surrounding environment. But if I had an audience and I was speaking to an audience, I would be getting feedback from them because that's how when I communicate with people, when I talk to people, I can feel their emotions. I can feel, how what I'm saying is resonating with them. And of course they have their own, responses, and they say things. And so when you're dealing with another person, it's hard to get to the center of your truth or the way that you perceive because there's a lot of stimuli going on around. And when you're in a public place and you're, out with more people, it's hard to center in and just, get to the core of your truth and what you're seeing. And, it's a distraction. That's why I don't do interviews. And that's why I don't do these videos, live videos where people are leaving comments, and because it'd be a distraction, right? The video would be way worse. And so, I am aware of an audience, but a lot of times I'm not. And I'm just talking, what my thoughts are to myself and, things I'm saying out loud that are, internalized, and whatever process I go through in terms of connecting to divinity and letting there be a flow and channeling or whatever it is. A better way of saying this is, let's say you talk to 20 different people about a subject matter, and each time maybe the 20 different people ask you 10 questions and you would have a different response to the 10 questions because of the people that you're sitting with. Even if you're being honest, it's being complicated by the number of people that are there. And if you're a people pleaser like Kennedy and you have some kind of void that you're filling, which he obviously does, he's going to get good at reading people and telling them what they want to hear and making himself look good. But that's dishonest, right? That's not being sincere. Like I've always felt like he's sincere, but now I see him differently. Like he's good at what he does, but once you see past the veil and there's something else there, it's just like with anything. You meet people and there's the initial reaction and then there's layers. And based on his performance, he's the best candidate, but again, it's a performance. It's performative. I think a lot of what he does is performative. And, there might be some sincerity there. And we'll see how this all plays out. I'm less interested in it now. But as it looks now, he's, a deeply messed up person with lots of character flaws. And I think he'll, possibly become unraveled. And they're going to use this against him, right? If there's any chance of him winning, they have to bring these things up unless they're, covering for him. I don't know why they would be. They have two great shills and they have two great assets in Biden and Trump. The people who control the system, they're getting everything they need from Biden and Trump. They don't have to bring in a third person. And they'll get everything they need from every other candidate. So there's no reason for them to have to do anything other than, elect the people that are there. They don't have to bring in somebody like Kennedy. But who knows? We'll see how it plays out. I don't think he's like completely owned and controlled, but he is in the sense that they have all this dirt on him. And, I guess people don't care about it. I guess people won't care that he was a serial cheater. I mean, the level of morality that goes on out there. People are just locked into their beliefs. All of it's interesting. We'll see how all of this plays out because 2024 is going to be great. It's, this election is going to be great, like in terms of entertainment value. But anyways, let's get to Kaboom. Greetings, brothers and sisters. I got one thing I want to definitely cover in terms of a comment and sort of wrap up all the stuff that I was talking about with Kennedy and any leftover thing. There was some news about Jamie Foxx going out. It's the first time since he had to apologize for that, what the New York Post called an anti-Semitic post. But I want to talk about it in terms of people's view of God and what I was referring to in the last video. There's another video that's still being checked to see if it's going to be monetized on my other channel that has a long voiceover that has to do with this. And that one's probably going to come up today or tomorrow. So I'll probably have two Hollywood celebrity dropping like flies there. And these are longer videos. So I just made public a Journey series video that I was supposed to make public last week. Today is the 13th of August. So having said all that, there's just a lot of content. I'm going to probably not put out this video till tomorrow on Monday. And then I'll get back into an every other day routine because it's just the content's building up and it really just hurts my channel because it becomes something like 4 or 5 hours of content get released on one day and no one has time to watch all that. So there's that. I saw some good movies I wanted to talk about briefly. And I don't want to talk too much about the content because these are good things to see. My wife and I watched Secret of Rowan Inish last night, which I had seen with my family a number of times. It's an Irish movie made in like 1996. They remastered it. I saw it was on, I taped it. I was wondering if I ever showed it to my wife because I knew she'd really love it. And it's just a masterpiece of a movie. It's kind of almost a kid's movie, but it's one of those ones that adults can watch. It's just a wonderful story about like the Irish have just a wonderful way of storytelling. I have a quarter Irish in me, and I didn't really think about that until I started to meet or make friends with Irish Abiyasis, and then my kids did some homeschooling on. They studied Ireland for a year in homeschooling and Irish stories, and they just have a great way of telling stories, and it's reflected in. I think my brother and I got that from that tradition or that part of our genetic makeup. But anyways, that's a wonderful movie. And then I had started watching The Hostels a couple of days ago, the movie Hostels, which I didn't realize I'd seen before, and it's just a masterpiece of a movie. I'm surprised it didn't win like awards and things. It's kind of a violent movie, but it's really pertinent to everything that's going on in the world today. I won't say anything more about that. And my wife and I started to watch after we watched a movie Saturday night, but we're starting to watch the show Friday Night Lights, which I saw some of years and years ago. It had a number of seasons, and I sold my TV. I didn't have a TV, but I watched maybe parts of the first season. And it's a really well done show. I remembered it not being as good as I experienced it, for network TV when my wife and I were watching it. Just in terms of, it's the obsession of a small kind of lower middle class town with their football team, high school football team. It's interesting because I know that it's a true thing. And the reason I brought up those three, whatever content related things is what I've wanted to talk about, what I was thinking about is, and this is what I was saying in my last two videos, this one and the one that hasn't been released yet on the Hollywood Celebrities Dropping Like Flies. I released a Hollywood Celebrity Dropping Like Flies yesterday on the 12th, but the other one is still going through the monetization process. And like I said, I'll make that public one way or another, whether they monetize it or not. But what I was referring to when I started to talk about the Old Testament, that the way a group of people perceives God is essential to how they become a social system. So a society doesn't believe in God at all that has its own social system. It becomes hardened and unimaginative, and it becomes black and white and scientific in a very cold way, and just materialistic, and without really any kind of life force in it. It's just a dead society, a society where people are all atheistic. There is, just a lack of, the connectivity, a lack of love, a lack of, like I said, imagination, these things. And then, these various different cultures over the years, there's Aboriginal cultures that were very in tune with nature. So they saw God in nature, like the native cultures, a lot of these, the Druid culture, and they see God everywhere in animal life, and they have a connection with God in that way. But they don't dive deep into the internal world and the world of spirit. To some extent they do, but it's not their main focus. It's God as nature. And for that reason, they're so much better at being like people in the natural world. Like the Native Americans enhanced America. America was a pristine country because the way that the native peoples treated nature. And no matter how warlike they were or how much hunting they did it in a way that just made the natural world better. They didn't process there's all these old growth trees because they're not looking at nature to exploit it, to take resources away from it. And so the environment, they were stewards of the environment, and they were helping, in a way, be guardians of nature, to whereas human beings now are, perpetrators of nature. We're harvesters of nature, where we look at nature as a resource. So let's go back to the beginning, though. When people first started to realize that there might be, some sort of divine force, what happened back then was, there was a barbarian type, Cro-Magnon type times. And people were extraordinarily warlike and didn't have the ability for abstract thought. So they couldn't understand God as an abstract being. And so they built these giant statues, like the statues you hear in the idol worship that you hear about in the Old Testament. and they had big idols that were like strong in nature, right? They could be like a bull, or they could be a warrior, or they could be like a dragon or a demon or something like that, something powerful. And higher developed souls would come down and charge those idols with spiritual energy, in some cases, in the lucky ones. And there would be divine energy coming from those idols. And the people would pray for it and experience some benefit. And the most devoted ones, the ones that clicked into it, would benefit from the subtle particles, the spiritual energy, and they would start developing abstract thought and feeling love and God's love. There was a time where people really didn't feel love. It was, everything was more animalistic, and there's some intuitive nature, but people are so violent and so aggressive and territorial that it was just a barbaric time to live. And then that gave way to more sophisticated tribal type of village-based tribal type of peoples that saw God in nature, the Druids, the Native Americans, the Aboriginal people in South America and Australia and these places. And they were harmony with nature, but there wasn't much movement internally in terms of their spiritual journey, right? They were harmonious, and they could live, they lived this way for thousands of years without much spiritual movement. And then came the idea of God as man, or man as God. You saw this, of course, with Jesus and Hindu religion, and with Muhammad and Krishna and Rama and Buddha and these other spiritual beings, of course, saints and people who were of a higher nature. Of course, they had that a little bit with shamanism and shamans. That was part of the previous iteration. And the problem with this is it gets transferred from God as man, as a divine man, to God as man as an egotistical man. And when you have the switch, which we see in the Judeo-Christian religion, and I think to Islam to whatever extent, and to some extent in Hinduism, they start worshiping the lower tendencies of human beings. And what also comes with that is people start believing that they're God. The queen is the God's, or the king now is God's representative on earth. Manifest destiny. Anything we do is okay or good because we're God in human form, or we worship a human who's God in human form. And with his blessing and permission, we can do whatever we want. And nature and everything lower than us, that we consider lower than us, animal life and all the rest of it, has been given to us by God for our playground, and we can do whatever we want with it. And that's what's happening now. And that's when religions get perverted. And when you start thinking of God, like I said in the Old Testament, in the Jewish Bible, as a punishing God, as a God that's egotistical and, and narcissistic and sadistic and plays mind games and gaslights and does all kinds of things and condemns people and curses people, right? When you think about God as a punishing God, that twists a group of people to live in a certain way. And that's happened within the Judeo-Christian religion and the stuff to do with Israel, and it's a point of view in which you come at, that you interpret the world, right? And years and years ago when I went to graduate school, we looked at the various psychological models. We had an entry-level course, I have a master's degree in counseling. And it was a small sort of new age transpersonal psychological program in New Mexico, but it looks at all the various models of the psychological, there's these different models that have they have a different way of dealing with people and seeing people. And there was a category, with each model, that the teacher, I had a good teacher there, a good professor. And she was a really tiny older woman. But she developed a way of teaching these models where she would say, well, how does this model think, how does this model conceive of human beings? Like the behaviorist model, it's rewards and punishment. So most treatment centers and lots of prisons and Lots of programs, the Chinese program of whatever they call it, the social credit score. Of course, thumbs up and likes and things you get on the internet. This is part of it. It's rewards and punishment. Pavlov's dog. And if you're a parent or you have to be a supervisor, you have some sort of behavioral management program. But it's the lower level, the lowest level. It doesn't acknowledge a soul. It doesn't acknowledge a higher consciousness. It's just rewards and punishment, right? You reward good behaviors and you punish bad behaviors. And so, that's an example of one of the models. Also, how does healing, how does evolution take place in that model? How does change take place? What are the mechanisms for change? There's a model where there's a positive, unconditional positive regard for people. So the therapist is just all positive, never ever says anything negative to the client, and just nurtures them. And that's the model is that most people have been damaged and they need support. Of course, I've talked about solution-focused therapy, which is about just working on the solution. And so there was these various ways of looking at it. How does a human being, what does the model define human being as? What makes up a human being? What makes a human being work? And that is a good way to understand the model. Because the way a psychological model thinks about human beings, if it thinks that human beings are soulless and are just like machines, then the behaviorist model makes sense. And so the way that they heal, the way that healing takes place, the way that, that psychological growth and development take place, like that's another category, that's another, these different subheadings. And, what are the methods? What are the techniques that are used, right? So when you understand how other people in your life and groups of people and demographics, because people in different countries, they have a different, a different way of perceiving what human beings are, and human beings evil. Like I talked about being a sinner, right? And if you define all human beings as sinners, then anybody who's a saint is not a human being or is a blasphemer against God, right? And so if you look at human beings as only being a sinner, and you ignore the fact that human beings have become saints and have evolved, right? That's one of the problems with Christianity is Jesus is just born as God's only son. And so Jesus is different, and he didn't evolve. And so you have no chance. Like, you can't do what Jesus did because you're not the only son of God, and Jesus didn't change and evolve and become something. He was already that. There's also avatars. Krishna was an avatar. This is a concept, a different way of the original way of using the word avatar, as it's used in the Sajmarg teachings. Krishna and Rama were avatars, where they came down from a certain spiritual, approach that was higher than most humans, but wasn't the goal, the ultimate goal of merging in God. And they didn't change or evolve. They were just that. Like, they didn't have to go through any obstacles or any sort of tests. They just were where they were when they came in. They didn't have to grow spiritually. But the difference between Hinduism and Christianity is, in Hinduism, there are many examples of saints and spiritual beings and masters who have evolved and changed. In Christianity and Judaism, there's this idea of the Messiah in Judaism, and there is some saints in Christianity. I don't know if there's saints in Judaism. There's heroes, but again, this idea that people are born evil and are evil in nature, well, that's going to shape your society. That's going to shape your culture, and it's going to be a sad culture, right? It's going to be an unevolved culture, very materialistic, and that's what we have now in the Western world. The Judeo-Christian people, with this idea that everyone's a sinner, and you're not going to change and evolve spiritually, but you might as well have a good life and enjoy yourself. And everything becomes hyper materialistic, and also there's a tendency to be like bad boys, like to be like bad people, to have flirtation with the dark side, because if that's your true nature, to be evil if you're born a sinner, and you're working against your nature, what you are as a person. If you're a person, if your tendency is to sin, that's sinner's sin, and you're trying to not sin, like what you're trying to do is hold back your nature, and then these things become taboo that you really want to do, but you're trying to make yourself not do them, even though it's your nature to do them, based on the definition of how your belief system, how your religion sees people. Then these tendencies become, you think about them more and more, and you build these what's called samskaras, from my, belief system in the Sajmark system of impressions. And those impressions just grow because when you forbid something, it makes people do it. When you say, oh, don't do that, you say to people, hey, don't look over there, they'll all look, right? Like people just resist being told, what not to do, especially people from the West. And so if you make things forbidden, they're going to do all those things, right? I mean, all the Ten Commandments, people are breaking those 10 Commandments all the time. Like everybody breaks at least, half of those commandments in their life, and some people break all of them. And so what good are the commandments when it's just going to drive people who are, sinners by nature to break those commandments? And so that's why we have the society we have now, because the way that the people in power view God. There's a lot of, violence in the, in our culture and American culture, but also in the other Middle Eastern cultures. So I assume, that has a lot to do with the teachings of Islam in terms of the people who are Muslim. And you can see culture by culture, the way that the people view God, the way that they define themselves as human beings, their true nature as human beings, is reflected in their society. And so your perception of who you are and what you can be and what other people are and what humanity is essential to, changing and developing into something higher. Like if you understand that human beings have the potential to be saints and that that's something that you yourself can work on and achieve, in fact, it's your soul's purpose for you to work on and achieving that, then you see things in a way where it can be realistic, but also, there's upward movement, that there's the possibility for change and growth, and there's possibility to better yourself. We can better ourselves in the material world here in America. You can become richer and more famous and successful and things like that. But, in terms of spiritual growth, no one thinks about that because people don't think people can change. They don't think they can become saints, and they just think everyone's selfish, and we have a very cynical view. But if you see people who have actually reached a higher level of spiritual development, you realize, well, that's possible. And so that's what I was talking about. So culturally, any group, any religion that looks at human beings as being low, and we have a lower tendency, there's no doubt about it. We have an ego that's a potential demon, but we also have a soul that's a potential saint. And the Judeo-Christian religion, and I believe the various other religions, especially the Muslim religion, and I don't know that much about it, view people as essentially evil and have an evil nature and don't see that there's a way that we can rise up to be better. So no one's working on that in those cultures because they don't even think it's a possibility. And there's a hostility there, especially here in the West, towards saintly people. We kill our saints. We kill people who are spiritual. We try to bring them down. We topple them, right? There's a desire to take someone who's reached a higher level and bring them down to our level. There's a greediness and a selfishness and an envious nature now in our culture, which is all a part of that view in God. When you're not working on doing what you're supposed to do, you don't like to see other people doing that. When you're disconnected from your soul, you don't want to see people who are connected to their soul, especially in a selfish, competitive, jealous, cynical system and culture like ours. Okay, took a break, ate lunch. I'm working on a project outside a pond, which I'm going to get to do today because I don't have to put up a video, so I'm just going to do a little voiceover work today and have a light day. I've been getting sort of burnt out with the editing. I'm always able to produce the content. The editing kind of is the most draining part. So continuing from where I left off, there's a comment that feeds right into this. Let me see if I find it here. And the person says this is about, and this is my video entitled Bobby Kennedy Just Torpedoed His Chance for Truth or Support by His Take on Palestine. And I knew there'd be comments like this, so I'm glad to get it over with. And this one has other benefits for my purposes here. And the person says, how can someone like you, Paul, whenever you start off a comment like that, you're going to get banned, right? It's just the kind of condescending complaint department, any of these things, argumentative things that I talk about that I don't allow here. And, let's read this. How can someone like you, Paul, be so absolutely ignorant, being played like a silly child by someone who's just another player on the world stage? ? Well, great seer of truth, why are you asking me that question? Right? Kennedy is 100% part of the agenda, and his job for the satanic system is just revelation of method pertaining to oops. You don't know that, right? You don't know that he's 100% part of the agenda. We don't know whether he's part of the agenda yet because his part hasn't played out yet. We didn't know Trump was a part of the agenda till after COVID or during the COVID process, because they were certainly using Trump before that to push their agenda through. So the evidence was there, but until the plan is completely actualized, we don't know. And with some of the candidates, because they're just shells and they're just saying the things that the planners, the controllers want them to say. They're just regurgitating talking points. And so they're part of the agenda because they're pushing the agenda, right? But somebody who appears to be oppositional to the agenda, like Trump appeared to be, and like Kennedy appears to be, we don't know until their character arc is played out. And we don't know if Trump was ever consciously aware that he was being used. I don't think he is. I think Trump's just too stupid and arrogant to realize how much he got played and worked, right? And so for you to say that Kennedy's 100% a part of it, well, they'll try to use him. They're obviously trying to use him in various ways. And so far, it really hasn't worked. But until his character arc, his story arc, plays itself out, we don't know. Like, the evidence is just circumstantial now. And so let's go forward with a comment here. But that's the first part where the person is saying something that they don't know and not realizing they don't know it. You might believe it, right? And you might be right, but you don't know. He tells us his children have received all 722 of the mandatory bloops, along with the COVID bloop. Also, him and his wife, he said that they didn't receive the COVID. Or at least he hasn't. And I don't know if his wife has it or not. But that's, whatever that is. So that's not true. He hasn't taken the COVID bloop. And I think he's not going to take any more bloops from here on in, based on what he says. Maybe he's taken all of them. Maybe he owns stock in Pfizer. I don't know. But in terms of what he said, that's not what he said. That's an inaccurate portrayal. And I'm over him based on what I've been saying about it. Like, my enthusiasm for him is, there is none. And I'll talk about that in just a bit. I've already been talking about that. But in terms of what we know about his motivation, and if he's controlled, all of them are controlled by one way or another. Like, all of us are controlled in one way or another. All of us have things that bind us to the system. All of us have things that we can't live without. And we can't, whatever. Some people might be able to live outside the system, but there's something else in the system that they want, right? And so we're all owned by the system to some extent. We're all part of it. Like to think that there's a difference in terms of the controllers being so much more evil than you, unless there's some alien race or, like something like that. There's, very similar. At least most of the people are very similar. They've just had power and success, and it's corrupted them, right? But we'll get back into that in just a moment. Let's get to the comment when I get through this thing. Propagated the agenda of, also him and his wife have completely propagated the agenda that COVID-19 was a real boop and a real global worldwide boop killer pandemic. He said virus. I don't know why he booped out virus. And so you don't think it's a virus. And of course, he's the king of climate change. He's not that. And there's something different, like he's talked about chemtrails and some of these other things, right? So you don't really know what he's saying. Again, I am so, de-enthused by his position on Palestine and some of these other things that he's done. And I don't care about him having little differences in his opinion or any of these people, as long as the person has some legitimate truther in them. And I'll get back to that in a second. Let me read the rest of this. How are you being hypnotized by him just saying the truth pertaining to the boop? Don't you know that is his job on the world stage? His job is a revelation of method pertaining to bloop, just like Tucker Carlson, Rand Paul, both of them players on the world stage, to tell us the truth about the screwed up system, screwing us, yes, giving us no solution whatsoever, and doing anything of substance themselves. Their job is also revelation of method, all slaves, minions, puppets of the trillionaires, the true owners of this country. Very remedial perception by this person. And so I could go back through it and talk about all the ways this person's wrong about what Kennedy said. And not that nothing's important about that. The difference between Kennedy and Tucker Carlson and Rand Paul, and I would say Tucker Carlson does this maybe a little bit, but listening to Kennedy, I learned some things about some of the truther narratives that we have, that he had access to information that we don't. And so when you listen to Kennedy, there is some revelatory material in terms of being truther narratives. And so as a truther, somebody who's pursuing truth, there has to be some, element of a convincing origin story, like how you came about to be one of these people. Like, what made you different than the average sheeple? Kennedy has that. And then he has his own, way of viewing things, a lens in which he sees the world. And his lens, based on what he said, he's transparent, and he was authentic up until the Palestinian thing in a way that was different than any other politician. But none of that stuff matters. What's really wrong with the commenter's comment and their world's view is that there was no, someone who's obviously watched enough of my videos to, categorize me as being hypnotized by Kennedy, which is stupid. Because I said all along, I don't believe he or anybody else can fix the system. And even if he wins, they will do him like they're doing Trump. When I don't think Trump is legitimate either. But in terms of the way they've treated Trump, and it's constant harassment, constant scandal, constant being attacked, and nothing ever gets done. So even if Kennedy won, that's his presidency, because they're already doing that now to him. They're obstructing him in every possible way, changing the rules, attacking him, false accusations, just all the things that they do to anybody. Trump is a good example. So if Kennedy won, it wouldn't make a difference. And I said that all along. I said, I like what he's doing in terms of the show, exposing the Democratic Party for what it is, and all the things I said he was going to do, which I thought would take much longer, he's already done in terms of the Democrats have had to rig the election. They've had to come out and say that they believe censorship is now okay to violate the First Amendment because of the dangers of the MAGA Republicans and the disinformation and the truthers out there. So they said it's okay to violate our First Amendment rights because we're a danger to the system. And that's what they argued in this case, which was, brought about by, in part to do with stuff to do with Kennedy and Biden censoring him. And so whether he's an active participant in the drama and he's just playing a role or he's legitimate, it's still, the effects are the same. Truth is coming out. And that's all you can get out of this thing. Because what this person fails to realize, and, all truthers who think you're doing something, there's no resistance. There's virtually no resistance. You're not the resistance. You're not doing boop. None of us are doing boop. There's no method to stop them from doing what they're doing. Let's say there's a river and you got only remedial hand tools and a limited workforce, and you need to dam up the river. You need to block the river, and you're not a beaver, and there's no beavers around. You can't dam up that river, right? Because you don't have the proper knowledge, tools, equipment, and all of it, right? Financing. And the river is big enough so there's no chance of you ever doing that. You just don't have the ability, right? Like there's a giant boulder, you have to move it, and you don't have any power equipment, and you don't have enough people to move it. You can't do it. Like you don't have a method to stop the water, you have a method to lift up the boulder. You can't do that thing. Now there are solutions to those problems, but there really isn't a solution to our current situation because there's two outcomes here. One, the controllers prolong the system by executing their agenda, which is doomed to fail because they're losers and they're just desperate. But let's say they could save the system and they could, by executing this plan, the Agenda 31, the part that they can enjoy, right? But that's about it. And they can't do that. I'm just saying that as a possibility because it hasn't collapsed yet, right? That's the kicker here. It hasn't collapsed yet. So there's a possibility they can remake the system and get rid of lots of privileges and wipe away some of the debt and become more, whatever. What they have to do, dumb down the population, whatever they have to do, reduce the population, that they can save the system. It hasn't collapsed yet, but they can't. The other option is the system collapses. Those are our two options. There's no fixing the system. There's no removing the people in control because the system is so debt heavy and so demonic and so immoral, it needs to feed off evil to keep on going. And so here are your options. You could vote a good candidate into political office, and this person, the commenter, already said that's not possible because they're all controlled. And so you can't fix this politically. And this person's admitting you can't fix it politically because they're saying everybody's a shill. And so that option's off the table. You could boycott and change things economically. Well, that would mean that people who hate each other would have to come together and boycott. People don't like to boycott. People are lazy and they won't do it. But even if you boycotted, the companies are hell-bent on pushing through this agenda. They don't care if they suffer economically because they figure they're going to get bailed out on the other end. And economic collapse seems to be a part of their agenda, so boycotting will only add to that. Protesting doesn't work. We've seen it doesn't work. It almost always backfires. It certainly doesn't produce the desired result. Raising awareness doesn't work. That was the original idea behind InfoWars. But that idea was flawed from the beginning because people who are the most upset and the most, the quickest to wake up and the quickest to see the problems here, those are the most activated people. So you were waiting to wake up all the sheeple before you did something, right? So that agenda was always doomed to fail because waking people up meant what? That you were going to vote somebody into office? Well, we already established that won't work. But in either case, there's a lot more I could say about this, but it doesn't matter because we know the majority of sheeple have chosen not to wake up. In fact, they've been turned and activated against truthers, where they believe truthers are terrorists And, that's their position. And so they're even worse than we thought. It's not like they're just passive. They've been activated to work against the truthers. So we know that getting information out there has no effect. And so the whole truth movement has zero effect on the changing of the system. It never had a chance of doing anything. It's being used against us in various ways to remove our rights and censor us even more and things like that. So it's actually backfired, of course, with the QBs and all the rest of it, right? But just to, I could go through this and name all the other ways that you could attempt to change the system, but no matter what the tool or what the method you have for changing the system is meant to collapse. There's a time when, just like your death, like we're all trying to prevent our deaths, or maybe some of us are, at least people want to prevent their deaths, and people work towards prolonging their life, but you're going to die. There's no immortality, and there's no immortality for this system, which is such a defunct, evil system. And I'm not saying there aren't good things about it, but its essence is anti-God. It is unnatural and goes against God's will and the divine laws and all these things. We all know this. Most of us know it on some level. And there are all these empires that we've seen collapse, ones that we know about, ones that we can find historical evidence, and ones that we've heard about, and ones that have long been forgotten. And the one thing they have in common is at some point they thought that they were indestructible and they would go on forever, and then something happened or a bunch of things happened and they no longer exist, right? And that is always the case. You can't prolong civilizations, your life, or anything. Everything has its time of life and time of death, and our system's approaching its time of death. And so there's nothing anybody can do about it. We can witness all the evils and things that are going on and bring those back to God to send relief, bring the message back to God. But I think that's already been done. So the truth community, you can do things to wake people up so they're at least prepared for what's going to happen. That's what I do here, Pockets of the Future. That's something, right? But there's no real movement. There's no community. There's no working together. And so as we enter into our final days, what's the difference whether you vote or not? Like, the reason I don't vote is because it has no effect, and I'm lazy, and why bother doing something that's pointless? But voting for Kennedy before he talked about Palestine would have had a point. It would have brought about entertainment and things I'd like to see, and I'd like to see Kennedy debate, if not Joe Biden, Trump, or whatever, and I'd like to see the Democratic Party implode while it fixes and rigs the election against Kennedy in real time. And there's so many great things that have already started to happen. And so that's what I was saying about supporting him, that he wasn't the solution, he wasn't the savior. And, I felt like he was sincere and authentic, which I still feel like to some extent. I don't, can't explain the egregious Palestinian take. But there's no harm in it, because if the system's going to collapse, then what difference does it make what we do? Right? We can prepare, we can do things, and we can connect to God. We can do things to help our chances and help minimize the destruction, accepting our circumstances and changing and adapting and being grateful for them, which will always make things easier. We can do things internally. We can be more cooperative. We can be more grateful. But other than that, there isn't much we can do in terms of changing what's going to happen, because it's going to happen the way it's going to happen, and there's no stopping it. So this person's comment is 100% worthless, other than it's, I get to do this. Because the essence of this person's comment is these two lines. How can somebody like Paul be so absolutely ignorant, being played like a silly child by someone who is just another player on the world stage? And then the second line, how are you being so hypnotized by him just saying the truth pertaining to oops? And so those are the two lines that matter here. Because the person's trying to say that they're better than me, that I'm a fool for falling for Kennedy, and he knew it all along, and he's somehow better, and he's so better and so evolved as a person, he had to write this comment and let me and everybody else know about it, right? a comment that has zero value and is wrong factually and perceptually and is just a swing and a miss. Because the things he said aren't true, because you guys know my position on Kennedy was all along. And I said, right off the bat, it goes against what I always envisioned myself not voting or supporting the candidate again. But I wanted to see how this plays out. And I guess I still want to see how it plays out. But my support for him, I just don't have it because I just lost my enthusiasm because his position on Palestine was so bad. But there is a difference, or there was a difference between Kennedy and these other candidates. They all start off with some autonomy. They all start off not being as handled or not being completely handled or not being handled at all. And then as they move through the process, they become a celebrity or a big star. The bigger star you are, the bigger star you are as an athlete, the bigger star you are as a celebrity, the bigger your success and your ranking as president or a nationally recognized political figure, the more that everyone knows your name, the more that you're given a platform and people are always listening to you talk because they're constantly sticking a microphone in your face, the more you're owned and controlled. And so when they start off, they're not. And then they get handled. They get worked. They get played. They get chastised. Like Kennedy being accused of being anti-Semitic, and then the next thing you know, he's just dribbling all over Israel and this whole Palestinian take that he did. And so that is whatever it is, right? It's he's less than he was. He's more handled and more owned now than he was before. But this commenter gets pretty much everything wrong, especially the stuff about me, because I made it clear this was my position right from the start, right? And so the whole reason for this person to comment, I believe it's a dude, is to say that, they're better than me. How can you, Paul, like someone like me who knows so much and would never get fooled by a guy like Kennedy, so let me learn you something, son, right? He's trying to son me, but he failed because it's not right, it's not truth. Like, I mock people, so I don't care. It doesn't bother me, right? But when you're wrong, you suck at it. And so this comment has no value. It's not changing anything. It doesn't add anything to humanity. It's just a person trying to think they're bigger than better than they actually are, right? In a system that's collapsing around them. And there's better use for your energy. I mean, there's better use for your energy in anything than this. Because I'm going to ban you if you listen to me. So you're just doing this to try to, make me feel bad or make yourself feel good. And I know you can't make yourself feel good because you have to do something like this to build yourself up, which means that you don't feel good about yourself. People who says things like this. How can someone like you, Paul, be so absolutely ignorant, being played like a silly child by someone who's just another player on the world stage? Kennedy's 100% of the agenda. And then, how are you being so hypnotized by him just saying the truth pertaining to the vaccines? And so, it's swing and a miss. And with all of this stuff in the truth community, I wanted to say this, because this is a real truth. That if you knew the system was ending, or that there needed to be population reduction, or whatever there was, to save some portion of the system, or some people are going to survive and some people weren't going to survive, what would you do? If you were in a position of power and you knew the system was collapsing and you needed to wipe out certain numbers of population, that lots of humanity have to die, and whatever it is, like you knew exactly what needed to be done so that some people could survive, would you save yourself or your family? Like, be honest. Would you save the people that matter to you and the groups of people that matter to you? Or would you say, we'll just sacrifice ourselves for some other group? Like, be honest, right? You'd save yourself and the people that matter to you. That's what you would do. That's what people do. Every time there's a panic, which is another factor here in telling you the truth. Governments can't tell you the truth. The controlling people can't tell you the truth because people will panic. And it only takes a few to panic, and then everyone else has to do it. Remember when we went to the grocery store in COVID and they They bought up every stitch of toilet paper. As soon as toilet paper became available, people immediately bought it up with canned food and all the rest of it. I went to supermarkets. You guys all went to supermarkets that were completely, the shelves were stripped bare. And so when things break down or people get scared, they run to their bank and take out money. My bank didn't have any cash left. We went to take out some cash, and the woman said, we won't have cash till maybe next week. And she goes, but all the other banks have had a run too. So when COVID first was outbreak of COVID, people ran to the bank to make sure they got their money, screw everybody else. And they went and got as much stuff as they could, even things they don't need. They could have done this all along. You could be hoarding things right now. You could have a whole, whatever you have, a storage area full of toilet paper and things that you're going to be panicked about when the boop hits the fan. But you didn't do that. You waited till the announcement and you ran to the store panically. People did. I'm not saying you personally, but we know some people did, which set off a panic, because a few people panicking sets off a sort of a scarcity mentality. And, this is, my wife and I buy milk from these, I don't know what they're called, German something. They wear hats. They're kind of like Amish people. They bought the store from some people who were, I think also, I don't know. They're farming people, and they wear hats, and they're, they don't have as much technology. And they have cows, and they sell raw milk. And, they sell it for, pets and things like this. And every once in a while, their cows are calving, which means their cows are giving birth, and they can't milk their cows during that process. So they only have a few cows. They have less cows to milk, and they don't have as much milk. And I always know when that time is, because if you go to the store after, they only open one day a week. And if you go after a certain period of time, all the milk is gone, because people are lining up and they buy more milk than they normally do. You see people walking out with 4 gallons of milk, even though they know there's a shortage, and they say, all right, I'll cut back, or I'll only get 1 or 2 or whatever. They go and get as many as possible, and they get their first thing to make sure they get theirs and the person behind them doesn't get theirs or whatever, right? And there's a scarcity mentality even then. And so we know that people take care of themselves and their family. Like, why be mad at the controllers for that? The system is, again, you can say it's satanic or this or that, and this person isn't very evolved. I mean, whatever you want to think about it. But it is collapsing. And there needs to be population reduction. And there needs to be a change. And so these people are doing their best to save themselves and their families. They suck as people. These are selfish people who are hoarding wealth. I mean, I'm not defending them. But pretty much all of us would do the same thing. And all of us are in some way preparing. I mean, at least some of us are. And we're not preparing for everybody, right? The very reason you have firearms is because if, for a lot of people is when the boop hits the fan that you're ready to go, and everyone else is, out on their own, right? That you have your stuff and you're going to protect your stuff against other people. We're going to try to steal it because they didn't prepare. And screw those guys because they had the opportunity. I've been giving information out here for a while, and so has so many other people. And people refuse to believe it, or some people just too lazy to do anything, even if they do believe it. And then when the boop hits the fan, they're going to be running around trying to grab, stuff from people who actually prepared, because, that's what people do. And so, like, there's no reason to think that we're so much better than controllers when we all are doing basically the same thing. We're all wanting to save ourselves and the things that we love and the people we love and the people that are with us. And so we're dividing ourselves into groups, and it'll even be more so as everything collapses. And so, I don't get all mad at the controllers, because although they suck and there's, lots of things that they've done to lead humanity in the wrong direction, they are doing right now what all of us would do if we were in that situation, which is to rig the system in their favor so that they and their family can survive, those people can survive, and screw everybody else. And, that shows you how selfish we all are, because, that's everything, that we need to know about the system. That as soon as things get rough in a system where we've all had abundance, and we've all had lots of, benefits, in terms of our privileges and things. And as soon as there's a hint that those things are going away, people immediately they'll screw everyone else and grab as much as we can, right? And that, the people that this system has produced and our orientation to life and our selfishness and our entitlements and all these things tell you everything you need to know about the system and why it needs to collapse. Okay, so a brief explanation here. I guess I can post this beginning part on my other channel, my Hollywood Celebrities Dropping Like Flies, Apoc Laughs Now channel. But you can see here that I just released a video. Hollywood Celebrities Dropping this one here. Hollywood Celebrities Dropping Like Flies, that's what this means. Little Tay, Fake, RFK, and so much more. This video was originally made before the video on top of it, which came out afterwards. See, this was released on August 14th, but I put this up and have been waiting 4 days for them to monetize it, which they have done here, which there was no reason for them to demonetize in the first place. And that's messed everything up on both channels. And so there's just a backlog of content. I'm going to make a shorter video on my Pockets of the Future channel. So there's going to be two. That video is 1 hour and 30 minutes long. And then I'm going to make a short video on my Pockets of the Future channel, just so everybody understands what's going on here. And I'll post this explanation in my long video today on Pockets of the Future, but I'll also post in a short video on my Apoc Laughs Now channel, because I have to explain things, why videos seems to be out of date, because this one covers some of the same things, right? So, YouTube. Okay. So I'm going to make this video short. Like I said, I already did a long voiceover. Jamie Foxx steps out in public for the first time since apologizing for anti-Semitic post. And so they make it sound like it was 100% anti-Semitic. And it says here, Jamie Foxx was seen out in Los Angeles for the first time since he issued a public apology for a controversial post some believed was anti-Semitic. Jamie Foxx said it wasn't. And a number of people left comments saying that the saying, "they killed Jesus," is used all the time, and it doesn't mean Jewish people. It's not referring to Jewish people. And so that's what Jamie Foxx said. What he was saying was, it wasn't about Jewish people. It was about people who betrayed him. Personally, I guess he's got some things going on there. And there seems to be some support for what he's saying in terms of his story, right? You could either be, lying or not. But up here they're saying it's for sure anti-Semitic, right? They're using this word like it's guaranteed. And that's people's ability to discern what his intentions were, what he meant by that. And he gave an explanation, and it wasn't enough, because it never is. And that's the problem with this, and it's not just Jewish people. We have the age of being offended and cancel culture. And again, I'm not saying it's all Jewish people. I want to make that distinction, like I always do, because it isn't, obviously. We have the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, and we have other groups. And what they do here is, if you do something that can be considered anti-Semitic, you're guilty, and there's no way to prove your innocence. And they did this with Kennedy, and there's no apology for accusing you of being anti-Semitic, and you have to prove to them that you're not, right? Like, that's one of the problems here. And to demonstrate this tweet was going around. This is a guy who has, what I consider possibly a Jewish last name. And my wife sent me this, I think. Did you know the ADL considers 17% of the numbers between 0 and 100 hate symbols? And here are the list of numbers. Try to avoid using these numbers like this, or people might think you're a bigot. And if you use a number like this, you're guilty till you prove that you're innocent, and you really can't. And your story and explanation means nothing, and no apology is ever going to come to you for doing this, right? And this is mostly for famous people, obviously. So I searched for it, and they had this thing, hate symbol database, and it says hate symbols on display. They have these, database for these symbols. This is the ADL official PDF, and 1 through 11 is a numeric symbol used by Aryan Knights. 100%. 100% is a shorthand for 100% white among white supremacists. 109, 110. The figure is white supremacist numeric shorthand for the number of countries anti-Semitic claim Jews have been expelled from and calling for expulsion of Jews. 12. The number 12 is a numeric symbol for Aryan Brotherhood. Number 13 is a numeric symbol for Aryan Circle. And so this is goes on 14 thing, 14 and 88, which we saw with Kennedy. 18 is a white supremacist alphanumeric code for Adolf Hitler. 21, 2, and 12, 221 crew, 23 hand sign. 23 and 16, I'm not going to read all these. 28, I can't read all the explanations. 33 and 6, 38, 43, 5 words, 511, 737, 83, 88, 88 and 14, and then 88, and the 88 hand sign. So this is all white supremacist stuff. 9%, and then it goes from there to all these various symbols. And so I didn't see all those numbers that were listed, but they have this is just, all these, whatever it is, right? They have, this is just A's, right? This goes on. This is goes on and 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 on. And so these are just symbols. And here they go. It's just, they've been doing this for a while. These are all the numbers, numeric hate symbols. As you can see, I guess a lot of those numbers are in here. They're big on the number 88 for some reason. And they have more numbers here. So, they have all these resources. So at what point do you realize that this is backfired, that this isn't working? It's creating hate. It's creating, if not hate, a negative opinion of a group or your people, right? And this is what I've been saying in recent videos. It's not just done with the ADL and the Jewish Defense League, any of these types of things to do with Israel and Jewish people. This is being done with so many different people in the woke consciousness and the New Age, the liberal movement, and pretty much everywhere else. Everybody's hyper offended. And being offended, whenever I feel like I'm offended, and I don't have that feeling very much anymore. But based in my, the Sajmar way of looking at things, miseries as divine blessings, and all of it, it's supposed to be something that's positive. It releases some skaras and it releases things. And it does it in a variety of ways. It cleans off impressions and things that are blocking your connection to God. When things happen like this, things are said negatively about you or whatever it might be. And sometimes they're true. Sometimes they're true, and it's like a good way to, look at yourself and figure out what you need to change, and it's good feedback. But aside from all that, right, the biggest part is I'm not perfect, right? Of course there are things to criticize in every group and every person. We're far from perfect. We suck right now as people. Human beings suck collectively right now. And a lot of why we suck comes from our beliefs. And, now there are belief wars and people's rigid attachment to their beliefs and inability to accept reality is the way it is. Rearranging reality, finding ways to make, a fantasy of what is really happening, like create a fantastical, deceptive world or universe inside yourself that is far away from anything that resembles truth. And when that happens, truth is going to slap you in the face. It just is. The divine system is going to, push the truth in your face. The truth is going to come up to dispel you. I don't know if dispel is the right word, but to, to show you that your internal world is like fantasy and destructive and deceptive, and you're deceiving yourself. So the truth is always going to be there. The truth is always going to be slapping you in the face in life, just in general. Especially when your internal beliefs are taking you on a deceptive path. And the more that you invest in that path and the farther you get away from your soul's path and the divinity within you, there's going to be, warnings and at first warnings and then consequences and things that are there to knock you off your path, your current deceptive path, and get you to question your decision making and bring you back to the way that it's supposed to be, to be more honest. That's why that movie, The Hostiles, which I talked about in the beginning, is a great movie because of the, just the movement of the characters where they, suffered these traumas and they developed this hate towards, these varying groups. It's about Native Americans and like the military, and it's just a masterpiece of that. Bringing where events unfold and people come together where there's hatred. A lot of what happens in your death process when you're dying, it is unraveling your ego's, your the create your egotistical creation, which is deceptive. Your internal world that you've created that is, deceiving you from the truth. And so this idea of being offended by everything, that your beliefs are offended, and you have the right to extract something from the other party, especially when all they're doing is stating what they believe and what they view reality as. And, you look at all these hate groups that are listed by the ADL and these other, hate groups. I don't know anybody consciously, maybe there's a person commenting here, people commenting here, that I'm like, oh, they sound like they're in some sort of a hate group, right? But it's not that many people that are in white supremacist groups or any of these other groups, right? And those groups are fringe, and most people don't want any part of them. And the people in those groups are very unlikable. And, I saw something on this. I was in Idaho for a brief time, and there were some of these militia groups and things there. This is back in, I want to say, 1999, 2000, something like that. And, no, probably 2000. Yes, 2000, because my daughter had just been born there. And so there was a incident where happened where there was some sort of a, one of these white supremacist militia type groups. And there's a few of them in that area because it's all wooded, it's a beautiful place out there, and it's just like pure nature. There's like a tree that's like the biggest tree that's not a redwood. Like it's a big cedar tree, and it's just in the middle there. It's hooked into some sort of a spring, and it's like 20, it's got like a 20-foot diameter or something crazy like that, right? Huge tree. And my family and I drove out to see it, and there's nothing but dirt roads and things as you get closer and closer. Like a black bear ran right across our path. I mean, it's just, this very, and I don't know what it's like now, but back then it was not developed very much. And I was watching the news, like the local news on this group, and what happened was there's a kid and like a 20-year-old kid and his mom. And his mom was like maybe almost disabled or something. And they had a real bad old car that didn't run properly. And there was some kind of a compound for one of these groups. And there was about 20 or 30 people there. And when they were driving the car by their compound, it backfired. And so these guys who were hyper, believing, paranoid, believing that everyone's out to get them, thought that there was a gunshot. And so they they rolled out all their, trucks and things and chased down this crappy, poop box of a car, poop box of a car, right? And they took the kid out and they beat him with their guns, like they pistol whipped him, like. And the family sued the mom and kids sued the compound people, and they won the compound. They took over the land and the settlement because that's all that was available. And I saw a cop commenting about it. He said, these hate groups show up. He was like a local cop. He was like, we have to go out there, and they always fight amongst themselves. Like we have to go out there and break up fights, like constantly. And there was a few groups up there, right? It's in the panhandle of Idaho. But it made sense to me that these people who are very hateful are hard to get along with, right? There's a certain personality type that's attracted to that. And, in the truth community, we're right a lot. But that's about it. Like, as a group, you can see in the comments, and there's some nice people, they're good people, whatever. But in the comments, you see there's always wars and, there's just difficulties between people, right? And just there's always going to be stuff like that. And, there is. So there's certain personality types that are attracted to, anti-establishment type of mentality. And, these hate groups specifically, these are hateful people that are just, miserable and blaming everyone else for their miseries. And so they're not likable. And most people who have relatives who are part of this or, they just, it's not a good way to live. And I've talked about hate. When you have hate inside your system, it hurts you. And maybe you express it towards other people at some point, whatever it is. I mean, certainly you are. But that, is, I mean, the way the laws are and the way that everything works. And, those people are usually end up in an institution in one way or another after, whatever it is, some period of time. And once you go over towards the hateful side of things, it's really bad for you. Like hate feels bad. Resentment feels bad. Anger and, constant anger and fear feels bad. Fear and anger in the right, fear and anger are like more natural. In the right instances, they can be motivators and help you change and grow or, just survive. And so, whatever it might be. And like the right circumstances, but, hate and resentment and these negative things, victim consciousness where you just dwell and you feel like you've been victimized. I mean, groups that have victim consciousness just suck. When victim consciousness becomes a tenant, a building block of a group, either a religion or an ethnic group or whatever. And so many people have victim consciousness and all these things and are hyper offended all the time. And people are tired of it. We're just tired of hearing how everyone's out to get you. And they say that about us in the truth community. Like they say we're paranoid. And so, this thing with the ADL, we saw it with Kyrie Irving and it backfired tremendously. When Kyrie Irving posted something on social media and he didn't, say anything that was anti-Semitic, he just posted a video that they were saying was anti-Semitic. I watched a little of the video and the video sucked, and I could understand why the ADL and Jewish people might think it's anti-Semitic or it's, it's negative towards their belief system. But the way they handled that just backfired because Kyrie Irving didn't say anything about what he believed in the video, that he agreed 100% with everything that was in it. And Amazon still has it up, and they're not doing anything about that. So it was like, going after a celebrity, but not going after the platform that posted the video. And the video, I think, still up on Amazon. And it brought attention to the video. Like, I would have never watched that video otherwise, and I scanned through it. It's a bad video. It's like, it was poor quality. But it's become something where it's a boy who cried wolf type of situation where the majority of people are like, you just stop complaining, you stop, talking about how you're, whatever. And all these other groups have adopted these principles of victim consciousness and talking about being offended and trying to cancel people and shut people down and all these other things. And it's bad. Like it's having an opposite effect. At some point, when you're like have a bad husband or a bad wife, it happens more with a bad husband. And a woman just complains about her husband, and that's all she talks about, right? And at first they get sympathy, but after a while you're like, well, like you're just unpleasant to be around. I can understand why, like they start taking the abusive husband side or whatever because you haven't moved on. There's a woman who does a Sajmarg or did Heartfulness or whatever for years and years. Like I knew of her, like I don't think we ever really talked or anything, but I knew her husband a little bit more, but wasn't friends with them. But they were good, solid practitioners of the system, and people that were always there. And the woman was friends with me on Facebook, and her daughter died, and her daughter was in her 20s, and her daughter seemed to be like someone like a lot of people loved, had a good personality, right? And I never met her, but that's what it seemed like. At least that's how this woman was presenting her daughter, and she posted pictures of her daughter almost daily for like 2 years. In the beginning, there was all this sympathy, right? All these people were like, oh, she get lots of likes. And she would post quotes from people who, talked about how great her daughter was and post other things other people posted about it. And of course, in the beginning, that's part of the grieving process. And, Facebook was, where people, I guess Facebook has morphed and changed, but it was where people were connecting, at one point. Now it's like not like that at all. But she kept on doing it. She'd post pictures. She made the girls the girl's picture, her daughter's picture, her profile picture quite often. And, she was grieving on Facebook long after anybody, was, the thumbs up were dwindling, right? Like I didn't probably see all the posts. I didn't go on Facebook all that much. But every time I was on there, it was, uh, like she posts something about it like years later and nobody was noticing it, right? And she just, couldn't get over it. And I could understand that, like it's, loss of a child. It's not like it's she's being hostile or something, but it's just that people after a while lose interest in that, right? There's a time where you can grieve and, people will be sympathetic, but, there's a time where you just have to go on with your life. And at the same time, there was a guy who was, he was with Chargy a lot. And he was, kind of a big personality person. Somebody I liked, but had, I've talked about this guy in the Journey series. And he just went like full in against Trump. Like he would post 2 or 3 things a day on, Trump. And this is a person I knew and had conversations with and kind of liked. He was a little bit of a wild card, like a loose cannon. I had some issues with him, but like mostly I was, glad there were people like this that did my meditation because most of them just tried to act nice and spiritual. Like they were more like, reserved. And this guy just said what he thought, but he got obsessed with Trump. And, I knew he had some mental issues and like he had sort of some sort of, manic depression kind of thing. He had a divorce and, public divorce. And he went off with this younger woman in India. I was still married to his one wife, and the woman developed cancer. And I talked to this woman when we were in India, and she was like it was a weird relationship. Like he got married to her, like weeks after he got divorced, and then they got divorced like a month into it. And this just a weird stuff, right? Just kind of embarrassed himself, right? But he was just obsessed with Trump, and he'd post 3, 4 things. Every time I went on Facebook, there was things about him and, negative things about Trump. So this is probably 2016, 17. I just had to unfriend him because I was like, not that I cared, but I'm just like, dude, you got to move on. Like and this is somebody I knew, like, most of my Facebook friends I don't even know. But he'd lost it in some way. And this is what I'm talking about. Like at some point, you're talking about other people being the problem. You become the problem, right? You become what everybody focuses on. And it happens in life where something unfair happens to you and you never really deal with it, and then you think you could do something about it and you can't, and then you like you're just obsessed with it. And like these numbers and collecting all these hate symbols is like an obsession. Like they're obsessed, especially with hate towards Jewish people. The ADL gets into other things here, but and then they're constantly accusing people of stuff, and that they want to control your behavior and want you to be constantly aware that you might be accused of being anti-Semitic. And the net result of that is they might be able to control your behavior, but whenever force is used, and there's always force when you do these types of, it's like a manipulative, controlling behavior. When you try to control other people, there's always force. There's a counter force. The reaction is always there, and so the people might be, aware of not saying anything or not wanting to offend people or Jewish people particularly, in this case. But they resent it. They don't like you. They like you even less, and they dislike your controlling behaviors, and that's clearly the case, right? And so that creates hate, and that creates a backlash, and it's clearly there because I see it in the comment section all the time, and the Jewish community and ADL and these groups are saying there's a new like movement towards anti-Semitism, like it's a big thing. And they keep on going on shows and talking about it. And, and then there's all these other groups. Well, because, number one, the way that you've conducted yourselves has made it worse. Like, at some point, you got to realize that you don't accuse people. The Jamie Foxx thing, you should have let go. The Kyrie Irving thing, you should have let go. Because now there's division. There's resentment and hostility between the Jewish and black community. And there was this before. And it's gotten worse. So now that's been made worse. But the other thing is, and again, I don't know what the goal is of the ADL. Like, is it to make money? Is it to create conflict? Is it to create division? Like, I don't know. But it seems like the ADL is just hurting, for average Jewish people who are just trying to live their lives. They're getting, pushback because, there's been this, this behavior from the ADL. But in terms of the other thing is, there's so much division now, and divisions. We have belief wars. This is the era of the belief wars, right? And that's maybe an early entry into the year of. I forget what the year of this one is. That's weird. I can look it up, but maybe the 2024 will be the year of the belief wars. But like this is where we are, where everyone's just so locked into their beliefs, and there's all this hostility. And, I guess what people think is that words become actions, which is true. And actions are actions, and, thoughts becomes words, and plans become actions, which, I believe that that's the case as well. But they're trying to get into people's belief systems and change them forcefully, and that never works. It's never worked. It has the opposite effect. People go the opposite direction of the way that you're trying to, force them to go. Sometimes people's verbalization of things is just a way to release pressure. And like when you get rid of freedom of speech, there's like a pressure cooker where there's all this steam that builds up, and eventually there's so much steam there has to be a release valve to get rid of some of the the pressure, and otherwise it's going to explode. And so when you control things and contain things, the pressure builds up, and then eventually it explodes. And like this is happened historically in places, and with specific groups and demographics of people, and now it's coming around again. And, the best way to deal with it is to change the stuff inside of you. You get rid of whatever's inside of you that is attracting this kind of situation. When you incarnate, and this is a good way to look at life, like if you're hyper offended or you feel you're a victim because you're born as a Jewish person or a black person or as a woman or as a gay person or any of these things, or a white person now. I mean, I get lots of people who are white feel like they're being victimized, all these people. And I see the comments all the time, and I see the, the info out there in the media and the rest of it. But if you come in and you have this idea, or you develop this idea that the circumstances of your birth were chosen by your soul. So whatever you are, you're handicapped, you have a, whatever the color of your skin is, whatever the things that you don't like about yourself or you feel like are being targeted by other people and you're a victim in some way, childhood abuse even, I mean, whatever it is, that your soul chose this specific, everything in your life was chosen by your soul and given to you by God and your divine support system. You have these etheric beings that are around you to help you to get through life. And no matter how traumatic your life or how difficult you're born into a war or, there's family loss, your sibling dies or your parents, you lose your parents or, people have horrible lives, right? And that's there. But if you can look at it like your soul chose this stuff for you to go through, like whatever, like you go through a video game and there are difficult levels in that video game, challenges, and your soul is operating you as a person, and your ego develops and gets in the way, right? You start, being disconnected from your true purpose and what you are truly, which is a spiritual being. And your spiritual being isn't affected or, shouldn't be affected by, your soul shouldn't be affected by the trauma and things you go through. Because your soul is, there's nothing to, your soul doesn't feel pain in that way, right? Your soul feels a longing to go back to the Creator, the pain of love. And the pain of love is separation, and that's where you feel something on a soul level. When you lose a loved one, you feel the pain of separation, and that can be felt at a soul level. But most of the rest of the things you feel, anger and hatred and fear and envy and any number of lower level emotions, those are physical things that are to do with your body and your body consciousness and your ego. But your soul feels things, compassion, when you feel something in your heart, like a deeper level feeling, compassion, empathy, these things, that's things that are connected to love, that are feelings of love in one way or another. And your soul doesn't, feel trauma the way that you do, and doesn't feel, all the pain and suffering that you feel even on a physical level. Those things are, your soul doesn't feel those things. Those are things that you have to endure and go through to get to the pure feelings of your soul. So getting back to the original point here, though, that your soul chooses what's going on in your life, and whether it's unfair or not, whether it seems like it's just, overwhelming and too much for you to bear or whatever. If you get to that place where you're like, I'm experiencing this, I chose this. I'm not a victim. This is something my soul wants me to experience. If you get to that place, then it changes everything in terms of your processing what's going on in your life, that this is part of your experience, that God has given this to you for your reason. This is, it's just not random. It's just not evil. It's like there's something here. And that's, lacking very much in the truth community everywhere, but, in the truth community, like I was saying earlier in the first voiceover, when you understand that by the selfish way that people behave, that they will, what will they do to save themselves and their family? You see movies like this where people learn to turn back time, or, back to Superman, the original Superman movie with whatever that guy was that got paralyzed, Christopher Reeves. And Lois Lane dies, so he flies around the world and reverses the spin of the earth and turns back time so he can save his beloved Lois Lane. You can't do that, right? You can't go back in time and fix things. Things have happened for a reason. And, my wife and I we watched this show maybe like last week, I guess it was last week, The Lazarus Project. There's been three good shows we've watched that were on time travel, maybe four. And one of them wasn't the time traveler's wife that sucked, but there was interesting things about time travel. And in the Lazarus Project, they've saved the world a number of times. Yet every time they save the world, something else happens. And there's one, disgruntled guy. I don't want to get into the spoiler alert stuff that says, maybe the world wants to end, right? And, this is what happens if you change the fate of something. It's just going to manifest in a different way. You can, change something, or you can get rid of something that was supposed to happen, but it's going to happen anyway. It's just a matter of time. You can delay things. And to my understanding, the nuclear war that we were slated to have and we're going to have in the future was supposed to happen in either the 70s or the 80s, but it was avoided for spiritual reasons. Like there's spiritual intervention to give people more time to get their boop together, which hasn't happened. And so you can't avoid things, right? But if you can change the way that you go through something. And that's why I always talk about being grateful. You have to work towards gratitude. And it's hard. It's not like I'm some expert on it. We all have to do that work. It's all unpleasant. It's very easy to feel like a victim, to be mad at God. I mean, ultimately, people get mad at God or the powers that be. There's just this obsession in the truth community with these so-called controllers. And I want to get into that tomorrow with the whole thing with Hawaii on my other channel, the Apocalypse Now channel. I got a whole thing to do about that. So there's just that, right? There's just this idea that people are running things and that there isn't some divine force and there isn't a plan and, these people running the system. But if you believe in God, there's lots of people in the truth community claim to believe in God, and yet you still believe that the controllers control everything. It's giving them, way more power than they actually have. And you see that all the time they have plans that don't work. They have, things that they try to, execute, and they don't pan out the way they wanted it to, because they're subject to the same laws. No matter how much money power you have, or how much governmental power you have, or how much religious power you have, you can't prevent things from happening, including death. And we're all in that process. We're all in the dying process. And so all this stuff to do with victim consciousness, all this stuff to do with being offended, all this stuff with finger pointing about how bad everyone else is a lie. Because things are happening exactly the way they should. And there are consequences for living collectively in the wrong way, a dysfunctional system that's imploding on us. And we've all engaged in those things. And we have to take our lumps, take our medicine, just because that's, what we're supposed to do. And the way to do that is to understand that these are all things that are being done for our good, for our collective evolution. And the stuff that we have to go through, and the boop we have to eat in life, and the difficulties we have to deal with are there to, free us from our own illusion of ourselves and illusions of grandeur and narcissism and things, and to understand that, we're not the only ones. Like, we're not the, everyone else has their own, we're not the chosen one personally, right? Or the chosen ones. Like, we're not that. There is no chosen ones. We're all, we're all here working towards, our soul's path. At least we should be. A lot of people aren't, and the majority of people aren't, and that's why the system's imploding in front of us. And so we'd all suffer when the system implodes. We're all going to suffer. It's going to be worse than it is now. Our lifestyle is not going to be as good. And our, privileges will disappear. And that's just what it is. There's no stopping that. And, but there's truth in it, right? There's truth in, this system collapsing. I mean, it's a deceptive system that's coming down. And then we have to deal with the aftermath. And that's just for all of us. But everyone trying to, push their agenda in a manipulative way, and all this victim consciousness is, the wrong way to go about it. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely pointing to the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.